This course is about my best practices. It's not something that is universal, it is what works for me, and I'm going to try to give you the benefit of 20 years of experience with the PCSoft tools in order to give you a good start on what to do to have the best result. In this course we're going to talk about using a charter and other project good options, commands, variable and procedure naming conventions, data management, security, and so on. I'm going to try to convince you that the way I'm doing things is not only working for me, but can also work very well for you. Let's have a look first at using a charter. WxDev in its current version offers a charter mechanism. Use it. It's really great. It's going to make your life really much easier. So what is a charter? If you don't know that yet, you have in the project description a charter tab in which you can decide to use or not a charter. And a charter is basically a list of prefixes for all the objects that are managed by WxDev. By object, I'm not talking about object-oriented programming. I'm talking about everything: windows, variables, each type of variable, each type of field on the screen, each type of field for WebDev, each type of really absolutely everything. So if you use that mechanism, what it's going to do is wait for you to say, okay, my string is a string, and when you validate that, it's going to add a prefix in front of your string depending of the type string, depending of if it's a local or a global variable or a member of a class, and so on. What that will allow you to do is to always know what you are dealing with. When each object can and will be prefixed, you can, just by reading your code, say, okay, here what am I doing? I'm putting a string inside an integer. So what will that do? Well, it depends on what I have on my string, but at least I know that I'm putting a string in an integer and not an integer in an integer. So is that really what I want to do or not? If I don't have this kind of information on each variable and each object I'm working on in my application, I can very easily mistake a file name for a window name, a variable name for a field name, and so on. So it's really extremely important for coding, for debugging, for a good management, in fact, of your resources. Of course, the charter mechanism doesn't work in the analysis. When you are describing a file, I would personally really love that I declare my string in as a field of a file, say that it's a string, and automatically have a S prefixing it. Well, that's the only place in the whole program where it doesn't work. So in the analysis you have to do it yourself, and I really advise you to do it, because of course it's clear at the moment when you are describing your file, you know exactly what is what, but afterwards in your application is the status field a boolean, an integer, a string field? Well, you don't know, you don't remember, you have to go look. If you have a B status, you know that it's a boolean. If you have an I status, you know it's an integer, and so on. So really from the beginning of your application, using proper variable name and proper prefixes, you can deal with a lot of things much more easily. So, of course, WxDev use a default charter. So at first, just use the default charter. then eventually make your own or use mine. Mine will be on the DVD that you're going to receive. You can use it. I've been using it for quite some time and it's working well for me. The main differences between mine and the default is that I went a little further in the type definition. Let's have a look. In that project, it's called WD Charter and Convention. You can go in the project description, and there the last tab is the charter. We are interested currently with that part of the tab. They stuck several things that have nothing to do with the charter on that tab, but it's still the charter tab. So very importantly, you have to check that automatically prefix the project variable and elements. Check that, let WinDev prefix for you and help you do the job. Then you have this one, hide the display of prefixes. Don't do that. You don't want to have two variables that are prefixed look exactly the same on screen. There are some examples coming with WinDev where they are doing exactly that. It's a project, it's automatically prefixed, but the prefixes are hidden, which means that you have two fields, name code. One is an EDT code, the other is an STC code, and you don't see the prefixes. So when you're looking at the code, you see twice this code thing and used totally differently, and you don't understand. And if you don't come here and remove that hide the display of prefixes, you just wonder what they can be doing. So this, I don't know why they put this hide the display of prefixes, but if you prefix the field, you want to see it. So this one checked, this one not. Then let's have a look. Here you can choose what charter to use. So you have the standard chart, and we can go edit it very easily. And in this standard chart you have all type of element. Project element, templates, document query, and all this kind of thing. Windows control, ActiveX control, edit control, and so on. Page control, so that's for web dev, of course. Report control for everything. Type of variable, that's my favorite. That's the one that I'm using all the time, obviously, because you're in your code generally dealing with variable or field of the screen, but most of the time variable. And scope of variable, that's also extremely interesting, because you want to know if a variable is global, local, or anything in between. As you can see here, all the global variables are G. The local variable is not prefixed, and that's about it. In type of variable, all the integer are using N, the same letter, without any distinction. So you don't know if it's an 8-byte unsigned, a 1-byte integer, and so on. So what I did in my charter, that you can select here, FH chart, and edit it. As you can see, a 1-byte integer is I1. I prefer to use the I compared to the N. I know that in mathematics it's N, but to remember it when you are coding, you're not doing math, so I really prefer the I for integer. And then, if it's an inside int on 1, it's U I1. If it's a 2-byte int, it's I2, and so on. So with that, I know exactly which variable is what in more precise way than the default charter gives me. That's mainly the type of modification that I did in the charter. On the same way, the scope of variable, as you can see, has been changed. So variable that is global to the window is not G anymore, but GW. Global to a page is GPG. Global to a project is GP. So now I know if my variable is just for the window or for the whole project, which is something that is not given to you by the default charter coming with WinDev. I don't know for what reason, but it's, I think, something that is clearly missing from the design. So you can just change that or just use mine and go further after that when you're using things that, and just use one charter for all your application. And when you have several developers, enforce the fact that they are all using the charter and the same one, of course, because you want your code to be as standardized as possible. So with that, we end up having something that tells me, okay, this variable is global to the window. It's an 8-byte integer, and therefore if I put that value in a 4-byte integer that is global to the project, okay, perhaps I'm going to save it, but perhaps I'm going to have a problem because it's too big and the variable doesn't fit. So all that is going to give me really visually the fact that I'm doing something strange. Remember, this is my charter. You don't have to use it. You can use the default one or create your own. I don't care, but please use a charter. It's really extremely powerful and it's going to help you a lot in your development. And here is an example taken from the real life. In fact, it's a post that was published in a French forum. The guy was saying, hey guys, I'm a beginner in WinDev and I have this error in my code. Please have a look and tell me what's going on. So the code by itself was something like that. I translated it in English code in order for it to be more readable for you. But you see, on that line here, there was an error with incompatible types. That's the only information that the guy was giving us. So that line is, okay, one variable equal another variable minus a third one. Well, if you look at it that, you have absolutely no idea what the variables are, what they are doing, what type they are, and it's an error about the type. So, of course, if you have the declaration just there, you can have a look. Okay, this one is an integer. This one is a string, and the other one is a string too. Yeah, like you're doing a subtraction between two strings and put the result in an integer and you think it's going to work. Well, the problem here is, okay, it's a beginner mistake, no problem. But if that beginner was prefixing using a charter and prefixing his variable, it would have here IW attente equal SWHENT minus SWHENR. And it would be an error that he wouldn't even commit, because you don't write a string minus another string. You don't do that. It doesn't have any sense. So it's not only an error that would be easy to find when it happened, it's an error that probably would never have happened in the first place, because, well, just writing integer equals string 1 minus string 2 is something that most of us will never do. If you don't know the type of the variable, it's something that you can certainly do very easily. There's no reason why not. So that's just one example. Of course, you're going to say that that's really a beginner mistake. That's just because the guy doesn't know what he's doing. Well, yes and no. Of course, the guy is a beginner. He told us so himself, so there's no question there. But I've seen many developers doing this kind of mistake just because their variables are not prefixed. They are not visibly typed. So from one time to the other, you're coming back in a module, you haven't worked in it for let's say 2 or 3 months, and you have little new functionality to add, and you see a variable, okay, this one is probably a real, and you don't check. You just use it, and it's not a real, it's an integer. So suddenly you don't have any decimals, and because it's in the middle of a big calculation, you don't see it. You just see that the result is incorrect, and because these decimals that are missing are then multiplied by 27, and suddenly you have your total that is wrong by 12 or 13, and you don't know why. And that's something that wouldn't happen if your all your variables are visibly typed, are prefixed, and the easiest way of doing that is to use a charter. Let's have a look at the other good options that you should use that are available in a project. First, your data files should always be set as in the current directory, in HF Classic in the analysis, and then you should use the hchange connection to reach your real database. Let me show you. So, in the project description, you should have here for the files directory of the current configuration or current directory. Never use the other ones. Then, in the analysis, you should always have your file as HF Classic. And then, in your code, and in this case it's going to be in the CL data base initDB class and method, you're going to have your either change connection or a change directory that you're going to do on your file to say, okay, it's hyperfile client server, it's in this directory, it's in that database, and so on and so forth. Why? Well, the reason is that this way everything should work without creating problems for you. If you do it in any other way, if by example in your analysis you say that your file are MS SQL, the analysis is going to ask you to enter a connection to your database. But the database that you use when you develop is most of the time not going to be the database that your customer is going to use when you install the program at his place. And that means that somewhere in one of the internal files of the analysis and the project, you will still have a connection on your own development database. And that is going to create problems in some cases where you will have your program hang just because it's trying to find a database that is just not there. By doing it the way I just described, you are not recording any connection to anything inside the project. You are doing it by code inside your own project at execution time, and you won't have any problem. Then, source manager. That's another one. In the source manager, you can choose to use it again in the project description. Use the SCM or not. There are other ways to connect to the SCM, but that's the main way. So when should you use the SCM and when should you not use the SCM? Well, most of the time, if you're working alone, I would say do not use it. It's just going to add a layer of complexity and a potential source of problem that is just not worth it if you're working alone. Now, if you're working as a team on a project, this is the only solution that you have that will allow you to say, okay, this I should not modify because it's already being modified by somebody else. It's really this functionality that you will have a lot of trouble living without if you're working as a team on one project. Now you have to know that the SCM works quite well when you're working locally in your office with several people on a local network, but you will have many more trouble when you're trying to do that over the internet. If you have a slow connection, you will have hiccups here and there, and you will have to deal with them. So if you're working alone, not worth it. If you're working as a team, very, very important to use the source manager. Report and query. If you use it, hide the project code. What does that mean? Well, the report and query is a tool that you can decide to use. Let me see where, yeah. Allow to start report and query. It's in the advanced options. If you do that, you're going to let your user create their own report and queries on your database, which is great. It's quite powerful. It may be a little too complex for some user, but it is an option that is very interesting. The problem is that for some technical reason that I cannot really understand, when you choose to let that option, this tool needs to have some part of the source of the project exposed. And don't ask me why. I've asked several times, but I've never got a good answer. And at that point, when you create your executable, if you use an hexadecimal editor on your executable, you will see in clear the source of your project init code. So that may be a problem if you have your file password, by example, or things like that in that area. So that's why you should always clean your project initialization code if you plan at any point to allow the report and queries module for your users. And it's very easy. You just call methods from a class, and all the hush hush stuff is inside the class, and nobody can access that. Then in the advanced option also you have the security option here. Look at that, automatic lock of the application. If your application contains any kind of sensitive data, then this is an option that you should use, and it will automatically block the application, and the user will have to enter the Windows data, the Windows user login and password, so the session user login and password, in order to access the application. Now, of course, you can develop your own locking system, but you have to know that there is one available here, that it's really important. And finally, the last option of the project that you should really look at is the compilation option, enable graphic user interface compilation errors. It's in there, and you should always enable that. Why? Because it will tell you each time you forget to put a label somewhere. Each time the label is too big for the area and is going to be cut at execution time. Each time you forget something in one language or another. Each time you set a window to be resizable, but there's no field that is going to move when the window is resized. So basically it's going to tell you in advance of all the visible problem that your program is going to have when your users are using it. So it's to make a program that is really is good looking, and that's important too, you will need to have this option enabled. So please do it from the beginning, and you will see all the time it's going to be very useful. I am now trying to do the traditional fight against the windmill and convince you that you should always comment your source. So let me show you first how I do it. Let's say that I have to create some coding, and the example that I'm going to show you is a real example, and it's coming from the debug and optimization courses. So you will find it also over there. Now, this is how I do it. I start by writing my algorithm as commands. Instead of writing my algorithm in a book, on paper, in a word processor or anything, I write it as commands here inside my source where I'm going to write the code. And as you can see, the thing is in English, understandable. So first create the file empty, start to count elapsed time, loop on creation of company, prepare the company information, add the company, store the company information, display company information, end of loop on creation of company, loop on stored company to create contacts, and so on and so forth. It's not important, but that is just some code that I have written for the optimization course in order to calculate the time needed to do some things and then find a way of improving it later. So it's just basically a big loop adding things in files. Okay? Once I have written my algorithm, I know what I want to do, then I'm going to write my code inside it, directly inside it. So as you can see, create the files empty is here. I have a few variable declaration in front. Then I'm creating my files. Start to count elapsed time is there. Okay, I'm putting my time value in a variable. Then loop on creation of company, and so on and so forth. And eventually I'm going to add commands here if I think that I need to say something more. This looks like nothing, but believe me, it has saved me countless number of time, because, well, when I'm coding first, I know always what I want to do, because that's what I have written before. What do I want to do? I want to do that. Then I can compare what I'm actually coding with what I want to do, which allows me to first code the right thing, and second, eventually find an error in what I wanted to do. Because when I'm coding, I say, well, wait a second, I wanted to do that, why? And I have everything directly in front of my nose. And then when I come back 3 months later and I want to debug something or modify something or whatever, I know what the code was supposed to do in the first place, because I have my algorithm directly as commands here. And then I also know what I've done because I have the code. I can compare, I can check, I can modify, and I can do all that with minimum loss of time. So you should always comment, and I think that this method is a very easy way to do it. Let's see why not commenting. In the last 20 years or so, I've been working in software development with many people, and curiously a very big percentage of them was not commenting or not commenting correctly their source code. So I heard, I think, nearly all the excuses, reason, or whatever you want to call them. Here's a small list. I'm not really good at that, or it takes too much time. Then there is the I didn't do it because I work alone, so there's no point. And of course the infamous and always really good, I'll comment after it's written, when the code is working. Yeah, like that's going to happen. Let's have a look why you should comment. You write your code faster if it's pre-commented. When somebody says it takes too much time to comment, it's because they never measure it. If they did, well, it'll take time to comment and then way less time to write the corresponding code. and you already gain time at that level because you know what you're doing. You don't have to think about it twice. It's already written. You just follow your already done skeleton. So you're already gaining time when you are pre-commenting your code. You debug the code faster. I think you understood that with the debug session. So you are gaining time when writing the code, gaining time while debugging the code. And debugging the code is really part of writing the code, so it really doesn't take too much time. And just a little point to answer the second excuse up there. You didn't do it because you code alone. Well, you code alone slower, and you debug your code alone slower too. So if you're happy to lose your time, well, it's up to you. Then also you modify your code faster. It's very rare in an application life that you're not going to come back at some point on some code that you wrote months or years ago and modify it. You're going to add a new functionality. You're going to change the way it's working. You're going to add this small little thing that the user wants. Well, if you arrive in a code that is not commented, even if you are the one who wrote it, it's going to take you much more time to do the modification, to understand what the code is doing, how it's doing it, why it's doing it, and you're just going to lose time again, and it will be the third time that you will be losing time. So don't comment. You are just shooting yourself in the foot. That's something that you cannot go around. You are losing time all over the place if you are not commenting your code. I estimate that a code should contain at least, it's a minimum, 30% of the line as comments. If you look at the statistic tool in WinDev, that's what you have currently in WinDev. You have the stats about the code, and you have the code header that is available in each procedure, and that you should use because it's giving you help when you are writing code, calling your procedure. It's telling you, displaying you your comment about the parameters and all these kind of things. So it really helps you a lot to use your own code. So in the stats you will see that if you use it, it will list for you all the codes that contains less than 40% comments. Well, yeah, I agree with them. It would be great if each and every code had 40% line of code. Well, believe me, I have been very happy when I was able to get my 30% from everybody I was working with. And I had to fight very badly with some people who otherwise were, but they were extremely bad debuggers, and there was a very good reason for that. Just there's no way to identify everything that the code is doing and should be doing if you don't know what it should be doing. It's that simple. It's really a basic 101. If you don't comment, you're in trouble. Now in WinDev 12, just to give you an idea, there is in the source management tool, there is now the possibility to block an object, to refuse this object reinsertion in the project if there is not enough commands in the code. So you can outright block it, or you can accept it, but the developer has to put a reason why there's not enough commands. It's to that extent. And it really doesn't matter if you work alone or not. First, remember one thing. Perhaps at some point you're not going to work alone anymore. So at that point it would be good for somebody else to be able to read your code. And second, well, tomorrow is another day, and you will have to come back in your code too. You will need to understand what it's doing to not lose time doing that. all the things that I told you. It takes too much time. I didn't do it because I work alone. I'll comment after it's written. All that is not good. Forget about it. Comment your code.